The Very Angry Wizard Killer, a Black Ocean short story, written by J.S. Morin, narrated by Michael Naramore. Despite the eternal fires, the beer in the guild hall of the Order of Prometheus ran ice cold. Tables were packed, and members had shuttled in from all across Seoul and points beyond to greet their newest inductees. Oh, the fresh young faces delivered directly from the Convocation's top schools were no strangers. Each had been pledging for years by this point, taking summer internships, shadowing mentors within the guild, attending public events. All but one of them would be showing up for new jobs at entry-level positions next Monday morning, representing the order as guards, private security, or naval service. All but one. All but Mordecai the Brown. Mort sat midways down the main trestle table, hoisting a gold-chased tankard emblazoned with the Order sigil on one side and the Convocation's on the other. It was a position accorded no special honor, nestled in among recent graduates of Harvard, Princeton, Tsinghua, and, of course, his alma mater, Oxford. Any extra attention he received related solely to the position he'd accepted straight out of university. Mort was going to be a librarian. "Must be nice, Brown," Bellamy Blackstone congratulated him sarcastically from across a platter of barbecue ribs. He was the captain of the Oxford debate team when Mort was a sophomore, and now wore a Convocation medallion stylized with the trappings of Earth Navy. "Grandpa sets you up with a nice, cushy library appointment."
"Mind your tongue,"
an elder grumbled from beneath his beard beside the young ship's wizard.
"Old bastard has better ears than a century should suffer."
A sidelong glance indicated the esteemed gentleman at the head of the table, allowing a junior member of the Order Council to refill his tankard. While he was technically not the head of the Order, Nepotism the Brown took the seat of honor because he was head of the Grand Council. Mort didn't look at the troublemaker as he tore a chunk off a turkey leg that had been mildly overcooked during the initiation rites.
"It's all right, Orpheus. Let him grumble. Bellamy's not allowed around real wizards much. Let him sharpen that dull tongue a little."
A tankard stopped halfway to Bellamy's lips. The Navy wizard set it back down.
"You think you're going to be some Merlin down there in the stacks, rounding up grimoires for plundered tomes? Captain of the intra-library bowling team? Ha! You'll be shelving undergraduate texts and dusting the boring tomes no one checks out. And there's a list a score of years long for even that."
"I'll pay my dues," Mort assured the small audience of gossips that hung on every word. He took a long swig from his beer tankard, knowing that his good humor was somewhere near the bottom. A few chugs later, he found it.
After all, who'd send a beardless librarian out into the harsh galaxy untrained?
The Convocation Library was sunny and dour all at once. Gobs of sunlight poured in from skylights high above the bookcases, but none of it could burn away the reverent pall that blanketed the staff. Patrons who looked too exuberant or talkative were quickly cowed into submission by graybeard glares and shushing as sharp as a referee's whistle. Mort wore freshly tailored robes from an artisan working out of Porter Square. Hand-stitched. None of that science-made stuff for the youngest librarian in generations. These moth-eaten relics were going to judge him on every errant comment and facial expression. Grandpa had warned him about that in no uncertain terms. Last thing he needed was criticism of his wardrobe.
"I assume, as an undergraduate, you had reason to familiarize yourself with the public areas of the library,"
Gaius stated without looking back. He led the newest librarian on what passed for an orientation tour. The comment was a dig, and Mort wasn't going to rise to it. He'd matriculated from Oxford, Harvard's chief rival in wizardly education, and the old book duster damn well knew it.
"Yes, I've been here before."
Mort had been coming to this library on his own since he was 5 years old, and only allowed to check out spell books with pictures. It was all of 2 blocks from his parents' house. Gaius glanced back over his shoulder.
"Don't take that tone with me, Page." "Librarian,"
Mort corrected him, keeping his tone as even as he could.
"Says so on my contract."
That paused the procession. Gaius had a carefully measured volume that thundered beneath his breath. He spun and wagged a finger at Mort. He'd have glared down that craggy nose of his if the young wizard weren't half a head taller.
"Looky here, boy. Nebuchadnezzar pulled so many strings to get you here that all I'm showing around is a marionette. You've got the job. You'll get your pay. But I'll roast in Beelzebub's sauna before I call you a librarian."
Another of the veteran librarians passing by with an armload of books cast a disapproving glare, prompting Gaius to clear his throat and continue in a more civil tone.
"Now keep close and mind you don't touch anything."
Mort tagged along, furnace stoked and smoke bottled up tight. Everyone had warned him of this, from his bowling and debate teammates to family friends to casual acquaintances who'd previously barely been on a passing hello basis. Their admonishments had ranged from good-natured ribbing about the hazing he'd want to expect to petty glee thinly disguising schadenfreude that the upstart would be getting what was coming to him. He relearned where the card catalog was and how to use one. He received a refresher course on alphabetical and numerical order, as well as the difference between the two. He was informed of the proper way to open a book and the correct orientation of one properly shelved, spine out, so the title was visible. All this instruction was given at a somewhat unlibrarian-like volume.
"Uh-huh. Yes, sir. I see that. Understood."
Inside a decade, this prick would be shining Mort's shoes. All these minor affronts were merely filed away for future petty vengeance.
"And this, of course, is the entrance to the vault of the plundered tomes."
For the first time during the tour, Mort's pulse quickened.
"Oh, I saw that look. Don't get your beard in a twist, or lack of beard, I suppose. You won't be working down in the vaults until your hair's gone gray. But it's on the tour, so tuck those hands away and keep them tucked."
Gaius traced his finger along the sigils of the door too quickly for Mort to memorize. A shame. Grandpa had never taught him the release glyph. All in good time, he supposed. Mort slid his hands into his sleeves and followed as his guide descended the stone staircase, spiraling down well below the main library. Mort had heard stories since he was old enough to remember. The vault was where all the nastiest books were kept. Every few decades, scientists got themselves all in a tizzy and tried to ban literature that supposedly corrupted children. The pretenses were always shabby, but the propaganda campaigns would have had a fellow believe that school children would be praying to misbegotten deities and sacrificing animals if they read Twain, Atwood, Salinger, or Frank. The Convocation kept books that actually described those practices up in the main library. No, the vault of the plundered tomes was filled with prose that could reanimate the dead, poison planets, hollow out minds, and cannibalize life forces. And the best part was, the librarians who worked down there got to read them. But today, the nastiest aspect of the vault was the heated argument whose shouts echoed up the stairwell.
"You can't expect us to do our jobs if you siphon off our best acquisitions, librarians."
Mort didn't recognize the voice, but he could make a guess based on context. It had to be Sarpedon, the guardian of the plundered tomes. The second participant sounded like Christmas dinners and birthday celebrations and family trips to the pyramids.
Promote! Train or drag your bony ass out of that chair and run an acquisition yourself for a change. Keep quiet, Gaius advised as they crept into the lower library. Mind yourself.
Mort followed, but let his gaze stray to the row taking place across the guardian's desk, where his grandfather was absorbing the verbal abuse like he came down here to recharge his gumption reserves.
All our teams are out. The lone librarian on duty is Sigurd, and he hasn't got a partner. Find him a new one. Grab a desk warmer from upstairs and stick him in a shuttle with Sigurd. Not like that pillbug's been in a fight in a crow's age. Chase and collect. Right, Sarpy?
The latter was a taunt, and Mort knew it. He cringed inwardly, yet secretly hoped Sarpedon would take the bait.
And why not just promote Sigurd to special assistant to wipe the Grand Counselor's ass? Be done with the whole department. Let the bloody dark wizards have free run outside Seoul.
A slow smile spread on Mort's face. Had Sarpedon met his grandfather?
Because, you yammering paperweight. That's what you're paid for. Sigurd's not your only employee, and far be it from me to stand in the career path of a promising librarian looking to get out from under your damp, sticky thumb. I'd suggest training more acquisition specialists and not sitting there assuming your staff is as immovable as Cristo Redentor. Psst,
an annoyed Gaius hissed from beside Mort.
This isn't a show. Come along. I'm not sending untrained academics out into the galaxy because you think it's right. You don't run this library any longer, and you might be Grand Counselor, but that doesn't give you authority over my staff. You may be able to lure them away with jobs that smell of caviar and champagne, but you can't convince me to send him, Nepotism the Brown declared.
Mort's heart stopped. The old man's finger pointed straight at him. He'd anticipated a twist, but not realized what it would be.
Step aside, Gaius ordered in a whisper. You're obscuring whomever he's trying to point at.
Dutifully, Mort took a wide step to his right. The finger tracked him like the nose of a hunting spaniel. Sarpedon scoffed.
Him? You can't be serious. If he were killed out there, you'd have my head on a pike in Harvard Yard. Nebuchadnezzar drew an X over his chest. Cross my heart. No repercussions. The lad's not here because he's fussy and meticulous. Come forward, boy.
Mort knew that Gaius no longer controlled his schedule for the day. He dutifully approached the guardian's desk. Grandpa thumped a bony-fingered hand onto his shoulder.
Mordecai here is going places. Outbowls me on account of my bad back. Can't put a lick of magic past him. And before you drag out the tired argument that bowling isn't the same as keel-hauling literary miscreants, I'd argue he's better equipped than any green librarian you'd send in his place. And I can foresee your objection that he's only here because I got some politicians' souls in jars in my study. Fair enough. But remember, the universe believes in nepotism as much as I do. The blood tells.
Sarpedon had been cowed. It was, given Grandpa's legendary debate skills, inevitable. But the guardian of the plundered tomes clung to a shred of self-respect.
I won't send him out there unwillingly.
Mort perked up, sensing an opening to join a conversation he'd been contentedly spectating. I'm willing. Thought it would take years, frankly. He raised a hand to catch Gaius's attention.
We'll pick up the tour when I get back from plundering some tomes.
Mort sat in front of the fireplace, nose buried in the adventures of Viscount Haversham. Not that he cared a whit for the stilted prose or the predictable plot. It was either that or be tempted to glance out the window at the yawning astral void in which they floated like Nemo's Nautilus beneath the oceans. Mort might have felt better with such an expert literary captain at the helm instead of the crackpot scientist piloting their shuttle. He'd have settled for the book being half as good as Jules Verne. "Here, put these on." Mort glanced up. His companion for the assignment was Sigurd Finionson. A bachelor in his late 50s, the acquisitions librarian had smooth skin and silver hair pulled into an artsy ponytail. While he'd boarded the shuttle attired in the common garb of their shared profession, he now wore a tight-sleeved technologist's business suit. The garment bag hooked over one extended finger suggested that Mort would soon be dressed likewise. When Mort didn't take the offered wardrobe, Sigurd withdrew his finger and left the bag hanging unattended. "Look, you can go back to reading right after. Nothing to worry about." "I've been to Luna," Mort snapped as he snatched the change of clothing from the air. He unzipped the bag and extracted a suit matching Sigurd's. The librarian chuckled. "Really? You're nervous about space travel?" Mort turned his back and began undressing. "I'm fine." "Well, Orion 4's gravity feels similar enough to Earth's you'll hardly notice after a few minutes. What we really need to nail down is how we handle the Dark Wizard." "Fire!" It was a simple enough plan. Time-honored, even. Grandpa had regaled him with stories enough that, even accounting for a braggart's margin, it had been his primary method for disposing of miscreants. "No, fire is actually off the menu entirely. In fact, if we had to confront them at all, something's gone wrong." Mort raised an eyebrow. The inner workings of the vault librarians were by edict secretive. It was like those assholes who tried to ruin hot dogs by harping on how they get made and from what. Everyone was happier when their hot dogs and librarians remained just a trifle mysterious. "Chase and collect. That's Sarpedon's policy. Your grandfather had his way. Turnover in the library was horrendous. Throw out whatever he might have told you about the job. We show up at the building the Inquisitors have ID'd for us. We announce ourselves. Don't worry, I know the script by heart. The Dark Wizard flees, leaving behind his research. As per our stated deal, we don't pursue and instead collect and document all the paperwork inside." "So, the Inquisitors mop up the mess?" Sigurd snickered. "Heavens, no. Why would they? Dark Wizards are librarian business." "But you just said—" Sigurd held up a finger. "We're librarians, first and foremost. Our job is the written word. Plenty of times the works in question aren't even illegal. We make copies of everything and return the originals with a polite letter that falls just shy of apology. But even when the works are forbidden, most of the time it's all theoretical. Just knowing we'll show up keeps recidivism to a minimum." "That look you're giving me. Were you actually hoping for a fight?" Mort composed his features, which had slipped into an inadvertent scowl. "I would have thought, at the very least, we'd haul them to earth in chains for a trial. The only trustworthy glyphed bindings are museum pieces worth more than you and me put together. Nebuchadnezzar used to drag them out for acquisitions, but after a few pairs got lost, the curators stopped lending them out. Really, just ignore everything he told you about how this job works." There was a soft thud. Mort glanced out the window and for the first time noticed blue. "I didn't even sense us come out of astral." He hastily pulled on his scientist's clown suit and wiggled his feet into shoes whose laces needed reminding to tie themselves. Brennan hustled in from the cockpit and punched a button set into the wall. "There we go, sirs. Enjoy your stay on Orion 4. I'll be here at your beck and call for departure." Sigurd inclined his head, but didn't speak to their pilot. "Thanks for the ride," Mort told the man as he shook his hand. Sigurd led the way down the ramp that folded down. "You'll get used to the feel of astral shifts once you get used to traveling more often. And don't consort with the tech liaisons. We have an air of mystery to maintain." The streets of Orion 4 reminded Mort of Earth with all the charm scrubbed away. Sure, Boston Prime was rife with technology, but it was still laid out old-world style with oddly meandering streets and historical sites preserved from centuries past. Towering skyscraper grids had all the character of a robot-run snack kiosk, of which this megalopolis had all too many. He hadn't even asked what city they were in, cities being strictly a governmental distinction that gave no hint about local dialects, cultures, or food and entertainment options. Sigurd led the way, referencing directions he swore to have memorized. In the back of his mind, he wondered whether this was all a setup. Hazing wasn't out of the realm of possibility. Orion, for better or worse, blue, sun, or yellow, was still a major core world. Was he being led to a surprise party? Would they be collecting a dossier of naughty flat pics? Would a gang of Oxford debate alumni be ready to pounce on him, render him powerless, and force him through the streets of Orion au naturel? Just as Mort was getting tempted by the smells of street food and about to slyly flash the Convocation sigil to a taquito vendor, Sigurd drew them to a halt with an upraised hand. He glanced at Mort without taking his attention off a nondescript tower of glass, steel, and silver. "This the place?" Sigurd smirked. "Not quite. Follow me." They crossed a street filled with ground traffic and semi-circumnavigated that structure in question, whose first floor was replete with storefronts hawking varied products and services that tempted Mort in much the same way as neon signage over a Vegas Prime casino, crass attempts to draw the eye to a wasteland of empty indulgence. Mort didn't need orange mango squeezers, CompuServe spectacles, or to have his Starship tax report audited for potential refunds. A tiny street that couldn't properly be called an alley led them to an oasis in the modernist hellscape. Though it looked like a public park, iron gates barred the entrance to a low-tech community called Shady Acres. Uniformed and pale blue in imitation of both the Orion Star and actual police personnel, a clean-shaven young man monitored the entrance. "Is someone expecting you?" The guard squelched the soft sounds of a sports broadcast emanating from his desk. Sigurd flashed the Convocation sigil. "I should hope not." Already a pale specimen, the guard blanched even whiter before fumbling around his workstation. Instantly, the gate slid open. Beyond the guard station, an asphalt road wound its way through a city block of retrovert housing. Expensive 2- and 3-story houses sprinkled along the way, landscaped in a variety of ancient styles in accordance with the eclectic architectural styles on display. Numbers carved into granite markers identified each by address. "Here we go. 1595 Cornwall Avenue." "Doesn't look like much." Missionary style, with white stucco and red clay tile roofs, the upper floors offered plentiful balconies that would have largely allowed the residents to gawk at buildings so tall they blotted out the sun. "Some of us work for the money. Trust me, this passes for luxury housing around here. Come on, let's go shoo the lord of the manor out of our way. Let me do the talking." Mort fell into step as Sigurd meandered up the walkway, admiring the adjacent houses along the way. Is this what working in the vault was going to be? Door-to-door burglary? Show up, knock on a door, which Sigurd did smartly when they reached it, and demand entry? "Hello? This is Wizard Sigurd with the Vault of the Plundered Tomes. You are implicated in dark wizardry. Surrender all written materials on the premises, and we will be on our way." He turned and gave Mort a wink as if to reassure him that this was all according to the playbook. When the door opened, a woman in a frumpy sweater and pleated skirt answered.
"Can I help you?"
Sigurd squinted at her.
"Non-wizard. You may depart. Take nothing with you. You'll be given leave to return when we are done. You can't just barge in here and—"
Sigurd held up his hand. The illusion of a silver sea with the Convocation's signature thunderbolt bisecting it shone in the woman's face.
"Did you not hear me? We're with the vault of the Plundered tomes."
Mort reached past them and rapped on the imitation wood. "It's a pretty thick door. Maybe take a Toastmaster class? Learn to project a little?"
"Please allow us past, miss. We don't want to make this uncivil."
The woman's eyes shot wide.
"Gracious! I'll alert Wizard Gareth to expect you."
"No!" Sigurd caught the woman by the arm as she turned to flee inside.
"Just tell him to get out. There's a way this is handled. He'll know."
Upon her release from Sigurd's grip, the woman scurried off into the house. He turned to his partner.
"Looks like you're not the only one new at this."
Mort kept silent about his suspicions to the contrary. Mort strolled in Sigurd's footsteps, sightseeing through the sprawling mini-mansion. Fake wood spoiled the illusion of opulence, and he found himself wondering how many were fooled who didn't know the difference. After all, earthwood was rare as fish slippers. Most of the Brown properties predated Earth's logging ban and maintained ancient buildings with protective magics. This place stank of nouveau riche pretension. "Not my taste, of course," Sigurd commented as he browsed closets and coffee tables for errant magical research. He paused at a sliding door and peered outside. "But the courtyard is a nice touch. Small, but the cramped sightlines block out the towers. Smart." "Smart's not the word for it," Mort grumbled. Something felt wrong here. He was supposedly on a mission to defend the citizens of Argo from deviant wizardry. But here he was, critiquing real estate and poring over housewares like a picky shopper at a charity sale.
"Oh? Pray tell, Mr. Brown."
Mort overlooked the slight in failing to address him as wizard, since Sigurd seemed genuinely playful about it.
"What's the way you'd describe this place?"
"Ominous."
"Oh, read those omens. By all means. We might have ourselves a dark wizard with the bourgeois tastes of a Martian Holovid star, but someone's likely spilled innocent blood here."
Mort perked up.
"I thought we didn't know what they'd actually been working on." "We don't. But innocent blood gets spilled a lot more often than you might think. Societal fringes bear the brunt. Transients, runaways, sex workers. Part of our job is to make sure things don't impact polite society."
"Wouldn't society be a lot more polite if we stopped them permanently?" Sigurd quit his gawking and shut the slider.
"Oh, don't harp on that. Most aren't fool enough to try again once they get caught. Last thing anyone wants is the black team coming for them."
"Aha!" Sigurd closed the cupboard he'd just opened.
"Look, it's not like there's never a call to eliminate an incorrigible practitioner of the icky arts. It's just, well, it's not us. We're the kid gloves."
"I don't think there's anything down here. Should I head upstairs?"
"Don't split up,"
Sigurd ordered. It was the firmest Mort had heard the librarian address him.
"Pairs are strength."
"Fine, let's both get upstairs then. I doubt anyone's storing their life's work in a vegetable crisper."
"Is that what this is?"
Sigurd inquired, sliding shut a drawer inside the refrigerator.
"Suppose that explains the broccoli. Sure sign of a dark wizard. Nasty stuff."
Mort could tell he was joking, despite a deadpan delivery. "Sorry if I'm not in the mood for levity. Don't know about your last partner, but... Sigurd burst out in cackling laughter.
Really? Wizard Wenling was an oil painting with eyes that followed you. All the humor of forced confession. You're a hoot, Mort. Plus, two Morphians on the same team always seemed like a recipe for strife. We never saw inner eye to inner eye, if you take my meaning. The Inquisitors can have her. She in some kind of trouble? No. Promotion to an Earthside post as a senior Inquisitor. Been a rash of promotions of late. Your grandfather paved you a path, you know.
Mort kept silent. Something besides the political machination of the core convocation institutions was bothering him.
Ah, that's more like it.
Sigurd swept a hand to present Mort a second-story study, as if he were the owner of the place. A pack-rat's warren of loose, unbound sheaves lay scattered, some with the ink still fresh. Sigurd must have noticed that last fact as well, because with a twinkling of his fingers and a tingle Mort felt in the back of his mind, the pages dried.
See, if we'd barged in and started doing what you Prometheans do, this could have all gone up like dry tinder. Would it have been the worst thing?
Mort asked as he idly scanned the topmost documents. He selected one and held it up towards Sigurd.
Does the Convocation really need to have a library where we keep... Merlin's testicles, really? They're trying to breed ants that can colonize a human brain and take control.
Sigurd shrugged.
It's a volume industry. One useful page in there and it's all worth the trouble. Let archives sort the vomit from the crown jewels.
Mort started a pile, stacking like sizes of parchment together and trying to read as little of the contents as possible. But papers weren't the only discoveries to be made. Sigurd rhymed a collection of jars in ice, lest the contents spill or waft, or even just reek and ruin a lunch they'd yet to eat. Mort unearthed a trio of ant farms and incinerated the tiny, potentially demonic inhabitants. Halfway through a pile of instructions on enchanted ant husbandry, Mort blinked a double take. He compared the page he'd just stacked with the one beneath it. He checked back and forth. There could be no doubt. There's more than one wizard working here. He could taste the bile in the back of his throat. Sigurd seemed unconcerned.
Probably comparing notes with a colleague. Probably a referral for a future assignment. But we'd best keep on our toes, just in case. Place is deserted, though, so keep it in your trousers.
Less convinced of their safety, Mort quickly rifled through the pages on his half of the desk, then moved on to Sigurd's half. He slapped a page down in front of his colleague.
First wizard.
Then another.
Second wizard.
And another.
3, 4, at least 5 of them working here. Same ink. You can tell by the bleed from black to purple where it's been blotted. Remarkable. That's all you can say? Remarkable? We've got a fucking ant cult here.
Sigurd chuckled, but there was an edge of nerves to it.
Well, we'll have quite the story to tell. Probably get a few free rounds at Jimmy's Cabaret out of it.
He went back to sorting stacks, now creating separate piles by handwriting. Mort grabbed him by the collar.
If you were running a crazy mind control cult and 2 librarians showed up and you've got 4 lackeys, would you run?
Sigurd shook an emphatic no.
Course not. I'd tuck my tail and start fresh in the borderlands where no self-respecting librarian would set foot given a choice. That's what you'd do if you were a lazy librarian, but what if you were batshit crazy enough to study pouring ants up people's noses to get them to obey you?
Sigurd gulped.
Gather everything you can. Let's make haste.
They were done sorting. Giant stacks grew in the middle of the table as arcane notes separated themselves from personal missives, scratch pages, and lunch requests. Mort's eyes began to cross. Words swam on pages. Blinking and rubbing his eyes only seemed to make things worse. "I think," Sigurd said, clearly struggling to form words. "I think someone's—" That was the last thing Mort heard before his hearing garbled as well. Mort awoke in a bed. A familiar bed. He was home. His family home, not his newly purchased and sparsely furnished apartment on Mount Auburn Street. In his old bedroom. His head swam. He recalled nothing of his ordeal. A quick rapping at the open door heralded Nancy's entry.
"Thought I heard you up. You had everyone worried."
What happened? How long had it been? Nancy had gone on a sorority trip to Europa to celebrate the end of her junior year. She wasn't expected back for a week yet.
"Sigurd brought you back. Those dark wizards put up a fight, but they knew they couldn't win. You got a little banged up. We couldn't be sure whether you'd been infected."
Infected? Mort struggled to piece together details, but it was like sculpting with dry sand. Nancy crossed the room quickly and laid a hand on Mort's chest as he tried to sit up.
"Lie still. Recuperate. The healers said I could tend to you if you cooperated."
Despite his weakened state, he managed to chuckle. "I can only imagine. But aside from a headache and a little vertigo, I'm fine." Nancy picked up a jar from a bedside table, unscrewed the lid, and daubed something out of it with a tiny cotton swab on a stick.
"Hold still. This might tickle."
Though he was no expert in medicine, he couldn't recall a headache cure that involved amber goo. "What is that stuff?"
"Who knows? I didn't question the Convocation healers. Just close your eyes and hold still."
Was this going to be his life? Molly-coddled and patronized? He supposed he could live with it. Few men could boast of prettier wives. Determined to be cheeky, he kept his eyes open a slit in the hopes of a morale-boosting peek down her blouse. What he saw instead was Nancy trying to ram the swab up his nose. Mort swatted her hand away. "What the blazes?"
"Quit being such a baby. It'll clear up your thoughts and make the headache go away. Just relax and it'll be over all the quicker."
That was when he noticed the ring on her finger. "Where'd you get that?" Nancy blushed as she coyly displayed the diamond engagement ring.
"From you, darling. Don't you remember?"
Maybe Mort didn't remember the details of his assignment on Orion, but he sure as Hades didn't forget proposing to Nancy Cromwell. He sat up despite her protests and efforts to stop him. "I did no such thing. I was— Well, cat's out of the sack now, but I was waiting until your birthday. You had to have ransacked my apartment to find where I hid it." Nancy's demeanor grew cold.
"Apparently. You've lost more memories than we thought. Now, if my fiancé can lie back and not be difficult, I won't have to summon the healers to deal with you."
Mort climbed out of bed. "Send them up! I want a few choice words. And find Sigurd. I want to hear his version of events."
"Mort!"
Nancy stamped her foot.
"Listen to me. This is serious."
Fighting back a wave of vertigo, Mort squeezed his eyes shut a moment. When he opened them, there were pages scattered across his writing desk. "What are those doing here? Those are the notes from Orion. They should be in the vault."
"I didn't leave them there," Nancy protested. "Just lie down and—"
"I don't need to lie down. I need answers." He shuffled unsteadily to the desk and began sifting through the pile that looked much like he'd left it on Orion. Why would he have arranged half of it in Sigurd's weird sorting system? Faster and faster, Mort slid aside pages. Here and there, blanks appeared, but the two librarians had filtered out anything inconsequential. Hadn't they? Some pages looked blank at a glance, but quickly inked script appeared as if late to work. Was it magic? Despite his skull-reaving headache, Mort attempted to quell any magic that might be at work. The whole bedroom wobbled. He snapped an accusing glare at Nancy. "Quit fighting me!" Nancy approached him like a rookie lion tamer, voice buttery sweet.
"Mort, I think you're getting worked up when what you need is bed rest."
She still held the swab as if trying to sneak it up on him. "Get away from me with that stuff!" Mort tried again to suppress magic, to stifle anyone trying to mess with the papers on the desk, to refuse the gunk Nancy was trying to foist on him. He fought back against the very headache his efforts were inducing. For a fraction of a second, he saw the upper-story study of the villa on Orion. The pages were on the desk of that house, not his parents'. Nancy was... Mort couldn't be certain who, except that she wasn't Nancy. The image was gone before he could make total sense of it. No time. His life was in terrible danger. Gathering all the pages up in a messy bundle in his arms, Mort crossed the bedroom in a drunkard's stumble.
"What are you doing? Put that stuff down and get back to bed."
Mort ignored non-Nancy. She was all wrong, and he should have known it sooner. He damn well hadn't proposed yet, even if it was a done deal the second he finished the question. And since when had she come back from a girl's vacation without a new hairdo, and wearing a blouse from last fall?
"Mort!"
Glass crashed as Mort threw himself out the window and into the unknown. But rather than land on the sidewalk of a Boston prime street he vaguely recognized, he hit the cobbles of a courtyard. The impact cleared his vision as pain roared in to fill every available space. His shoulder and right arm bore the brunt of the fall. His head glanced off the rocks, but only shot sparks behind his eyes. Boston Prime Police rushed at him as Mort pushed himself to his knees, cradling his right arm against his body. "Stop! Face down on the ground!" These weren't his thoughts. This wasn't real. None of it was. It couldn't be. Could it? Mort had passed the mental portion of his self-defense requirement on sheer willpower. The proctor overseeing the maze hadn't been able to work magic in Mort's presence. He didn't see through the illusions, the distractions, the misdirections that the others were forced to endure. He didn't have to. He was Mordecai the Brown, captain of the goddamn debate team and the top bowler of his generation. But now, against what he had to assume were 5 opponents, he stood no chance. They were in his mind. Their combined willpower exceeded even his. Or he was back on Earth, having a mental breakdown from the trauma of the assignment, which would have meant that Nancy was real. He'd forgotten proposing to her, and these Boston Prime Police were just doing their jobs, arresting someone who just jumped out the window in a very high-class neighborhood with a pile of stolen goods. The headache came on as a torrent. Thoughts hammered around inside his skull. No.
"Yes."
Get out of my head!
"You don't want to hurt Nancy."
There was only one way to get rid of the voices, assuming they weren't his own aberrant thoughts. Holy Prometheus, arm me with your divine fire. Burn back the darkness of ignorance. Incinerate my doubts. Leave me cleansed and pure, a weapon against all foes. Grant me power over the foremost of elements, and I will carry in my heart your eternal truth. Everything burns! Mort heard the roar of flames before his thoughts and vision both cleared, and he definitely heard the screams. The abatement of his headache came as such a relief that his mind finally allowed his body to pass out. But as the darkness and cobblestones raced toward his head, he saw the villa utterly engulfed in Promethean fire. It couldn't have been long. Mort heard the whine of an aerial vehicle directly overhead. He was ready to commend Brennan for being on top of things, but it wasn't the Convocation shuttle, rather some kind of civic rescue squad. Uniformed medics in hose masks and visors rappelled down to the courtyard, touching down between the concrete walls and decorative fountain just a few yards from Mort. Everything was on fire. From the clay tiles of the collapsed roof to the water in the fountain, boiling as the surface roared with flame, everything outside a short radius directly around Mort was a raging inferno. As his thoughts cleared, he spotted a second craft spraying bubble bath onto the fires, but the stuff just added fuel to the pyre. Sir, are you all right?" the nearest medic asked. From the urgency in his voice, Mort knew he must have looked a fright. When the fellow got handsy, Mort fended him off with his good arm. "I've been better, and frankly, you're a bit late to do anything about that." With a grunt of pain and effort, he climbed to his feet, accepting assistance that he was too infirm at the moment to defend against. The medic held a bright-tipped wand in Mort's eyes and moved it back and forth. "Do you know where you are?" Mort surveyed the scene. "My partner was handling the navigation. I was just along for muscle. They claimed it was a training assignment, but bugger all if my grandfather didn't suspect something like this might come up. Cranky old shit-stain," he said the latter with love. "Sir, what's your name?" Mort raised one eyebrow. "Oh, I see now. Bit of a head wound. You think I've gone daft. Well, I know damn well who I am. I'm Mordecai the Brown, Acquisitions Librarian of the Vault of the Plundered Tomes." Three days later, Mort stood at the petitioner's side of the Grand Council table. He was dressed as a proper librarian in well-made but plain brown robes with wide sleeves. He'd have kept his hands tucked into those sleeves, except he was favoring his right arm, tucking it against his body in lieu of a sling that would have made him look like an invalid before the council. This was a closed session. Other than the stenographers, it was just him and the members of the Grand Council in attendance. "What I want to know, Bertram," Nebuchadnezzar thundered, "is how your people reported a lone dark magic practitioner at the 1595 Cornwall site, and come to find out there were at least 5. Counselor Bertram, chief inquisitor of the Convocation, was a doughy weasel of a bureaucrat. If he'd had a heyday, it was long since past. He cleared his throat. "We have launched an internal investigation into the lapse in surveillance. It's possible, given the preliminary assessment of the Plundered Tomes archivists, that we may have had either a leak or a compromised inquisitor." Deflecting from the inquisitor's failings, Mort's own boss chimed in. "We have been unable to confirm the fate of Wizard Sigurd. I'd like to formally request an investigation by local oracles. I think we can all agree that Wizard Mordecai's reaction was excessive, and if he is the one who killed Sigurd—" "Stop right there," Nebuchadnezzar warned. "If the liaisons showed us the images, we have my grandson's own signed statement of the events. Hades grew colder with how much fire Mordecai borrowed. Given that the cultists seemed bound to overcome his mind, it seems logical that they were likewise attempting to turn Sigurd as well. Maybe they even succeeded." "Sounds like you're arguing his guilt," Bertram pointed out. All around the many-sided table, heads bobbed. Nebuchadnezzar scoffed. "Guilt? I'm arguing that Sigurd was a victim of friendly fire, pardon the gallows pun, completely on the souls of those cultists." Sarpedon stood with a scraping of his chair. "Codswallop! They had orders to chase and collect." "They didn't run," Mort responded, knowing that, to the shopping list of things he'd burned of late, he was adding a bridge. "We were trying to collect.
They ambushed us during our polite sorting of their instruction on how to weaponize brain ants."
A few snickers were quickly glared into silence around the table.
"While self-defense is permissible, even admirable given the circumstances, wholesale indiscriminate destruction is never acceptable,"
Sarpedon reasoned. He sounded like he was making a political point.
Nebuchadnezzar wasn't done. "You've all seen the images. It made a number of scientific outlets and the Times London. How's that make you all feel?" "Horrified."
Appalled. Impressed, I've got to admit it. I wouldn't want to cross whoever did that if I was a dark wizard.
"Aha!"
Grandpa Nebuchadnezzar pounced when he heard the answer he wanted.
"Dark wizards across the galaxy are going to be staining their pants at the prospect that someone who can do that to 5 wizards who had the element of surprise, and we're going to make sure those details get out." "We can't convince the entire convocation that a junior librarian is the boogeyman," Sarpedon argued. "Promote him! Make it official." "He's brand new, and he either killed or failed to protect his partner. No one's going to want to work with him, and I'm certainly not breaking up the black team to accommodate him."
Grandpa turned to Mort. At this distance, it was safe enough to make eye contact.
"Keep your chase and collect policy, Sarpedon. Keep your black team as is. But take Mordecai on as a solo act." "Wait just a—" "Let me finish. He faced off against 5 wizards who ambushed him while he was looking through paperwork. No more of that nonsense. Mort can bring back any surviving literature once the authors are dead. The Plundered Tomes hasn't had a proper attack dog in ages. What say you, boy?"
Mort thought of the course he'd plotted for his life. He'd always wanted to follow in his grandfather's footsteps, bringing fiery justice to the vilest of the vile in the Convocation. This was his chance to cut decades off his path to galaxy-wide respect. Nancy would worry constantly, of course, but she knew his long-term plans, and he'd be telling her of his new role before he proposed in a few weeks. All he had to lose was his life, and he'd only get stronger as the universe learned what he was made of. He would become the wandering samurai, the ancient West gunslinger, the red-shoed bowler that haunted the lanes of the borderlands.
"I accept. I've never been much of a people person anyway."
Thanks for listening to this Black Ocean adventure. This mission may be over, but there's plenty more for you to enjoy. For more magical mischief in the 26th century, search Black Ocean on your favorite audiobook store or visit blackoceanmissions.com. This has been The Very Angry Wizard Killer, a Black Ocean short story, written by J.S. Morin, narrated by Michael Naramore. Copyright 2023 by J.S. Morin. Production copyright 2023 by J.S. Morin.